Ukraine just dismantled the myth of Russian air defense again. It took out yet another major Russian military installation, eliminating an estimated 100 enemy troops in the process. It's just the latest in a long line of increasingly devastating attacks, perfectly planned and flawlessly executed, demonstrating the ever-growing might of the Ukrainian armed forces and the ever-weakening prospects of their opponents. Details of the attack were shared on May 21st by none other than the Ukrainian president himself, Volodymyr Zelensky. He confirmed that the Special Forces Alpha Team of the Ukrainian Security Service (SBU) carried out the strike, which targeted a Russian Federal Security Service (FSB) headquarters, which was reportedly located near the city of Henichesk, a port city in the partially occupied Kherson region of southern Ukraine. Looking out across the Sea of Azov, Henichesk sits on the Arabat Spit, or Arabat Arrow, a barrier spit that separates the sea from the Sivash, a series of salty lagoons, and stretches all the way down to eastern Crimea. There, according to reports, the FSB had established quite a sizable command post, with some analysts suggesting that they'd repurposed some sort of old hotel or resort complex. Regardless of what it once was or how it was once used, the area had been entirely taken over by Russia's Secret Service, with 9 main buildings in total. Every single one of those buildings was targeted by Ukraine's world-leading drone operators, with some unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, reportedly striking the roofs of the structures and others flying through the windows to blow up the buildings from within. Numerous large-scale explosions were reported at the site, and a massive fire subsequently broke out as well. This was backed up by video evidence which was shared online by the SBU and quite conclusively showed the enormous impact of the drones as they collided with various parts of the complex, triggering massive bursts of fire, shrapnel and smoke. Additionally, NASA's firm's satellite monitoring service detected high thermal signatures at the strike sites on May 17th, the date the attack reportedly took place. Zelensky's report also shed further light on the strike. There are good results from the soldiers of the SBU's Special Operations Center A. The headquarters of the Russian FSB officers were hit, and an anti-aircraft complex Pantsir S-1 was destroyed in our temporarily occupied territory. Thanks to this operation alone, the Russians suffered losses of about 100 occupiers killed and wounded. The Russians should understand that they need to end this war of theirs. Ukrainian sanctions of medium and long range will continue to work. Let's dig a little deeper into the facts. First, Zelensky mentioned a Pantsir S-1. That's one of Russia's best air defenses. Part of the larger Pantsir family, the S-1 is a self-propelled short to medium-range surface-to-air missile and anti-aircraft artillery system, designed primarily to protect military units, infrastructure, and even other air defenses. It uses a combination of 30mm autocannons and radar-guided missiles, harnessing both targeted acquisition radar and electro-optical systems to track up to 40 targets at a time. It's also able to engage numerous threats simultaneously, including everything from aircraft and helicopters to drones or precision munitions. In short, this is a relatively high-end piece of hardware, and Pantsirs have been used extensively over the course of the conflict so far. Russia has relied on them to help counteract the effects of Ukrainian drone swarms and low-flying aircraft, for example. Each unit can be worth up to $20 million, so the fact that Ukraine was able to destroy one is a real sign of success for Kyiv's forces and another economic headache for the enemy. Then there's the human cost of the attack. An estimated 100 Russian troops either killed or wounded, all in the span of a single day. There hasn't been any third-party confirmation of the exact kill count, but the video evidence paints a clear picture. The explosions are so large, it's almost impossible that anyone in any of those buildings was able to make it out in one piece. So even if the Ukrainian estimate is potentially a little on the high side, it's highly likely that there were dozens of Russian casualties at least. But perhaps the most damning element of the entire story is the fact that there was an air defense system in this area, the Pantsir S-1, yet it clearly wasn't sufficient to protect the facility, or even to defend itself. According to analysts, those drones likely traveled around 200 kilometers or 125 miles to reach their destination, or perhaps even more, depending on where they were launched from. They traveled all that way, potentially crossing other air defenses en route, as well as the Pantsir that they ultimately eliminated, but still weren't shot down. What's more, the sheer size of the impact suggests that the drones were carrying larger-than-average warheads. For a long time, when it came to planning and executing drone attacks, Ukraine was so often forced to make a choice between range or distance. It could only have one or the other, either sending its drones further, but with smaller warheads, or packing in more explosive firepower but having to focus on targets that were closer to home. From what we know about this attack, however, it seems that the problem of this trade-off has, at last, been solved. as Ukraine appears to be launching more damaging and devastating drone attacks on targets that are significant distances away. And this isn't just a one-off incident, it's part of an increasingly long list of examples of Russia being utterly unable to adequately protect its most important locations, even those that are quite far from the front lines. Indeed, only a couple of days after the Kherson attack, overnight on May 19th, Ukraine celebrated another successful strike, this time deep in the occupied Donetsk region, in the city of Shizna. There, drone pilots from Ukraine's unmanned systems forces carried out a precision attack against their Russian counterparts. They found and destroyed a training center used by the Russian armed forces to prepare UAV operators for combat. Robert Brovdy, codenamed Magyar, is one of the most well-known spokespeople for the unmanned systems forces, shared details of the attack on Facebook. He revealed that the mission had been named Snow-for-Ak Mat, as Shizna translates to snowy in English. Magyar also explained that 11 attack drones were used, each one armed with 100 kg or 220 pound warheads, and went on to reveal the impact of the attack. We hit a training and production facility and temporary deployment point of the 78th Sever Akhmat Motorized Special Purpose Regiment, named after A.A. Kadyrov, operating as part of the 42nd Division of the Worms Army. The main two-story compound, covering 2,484 square meters, housed UAV and warhead assembly facilities and a floor where personnel were stationed. The stock of ammunition in the basement added unforgettable impressions for the Worms who were at the site. Magyar went on to note that an estimated 65 Russian Special Forces cadets were killed in the attack, along with the head of the center, who also happens to be a doctor of the Russian Academy of Rocket and Artillery Services, codenamed Bury. Again, this is exactly the kind of place that the Russians should be able to protect. It's in occupied territory, it's an important military location, and it shouldn't have been that difficult for what is supposed to be the world's second strongest army to set up adequate air defenses around it. Yet once again, Ukrainian drones were able to fly into the area unopposed and take out their target with impunity. And this sort of thing is happening with increasing regularity as the war goes on. In late April, for example, drone operators from the 413th Separate Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces successfully struck Russia's Bars Sarmat Center, a major drone development site in the occupied Zaporizhia region. According to the military's report, the strike targeted a temporary deployment point, along with several workshops where Russian forces manufactured and equipped everything from UAVs to ground robotic systems and electronic warfare equipment as well. Earlier in April, there was an even bigger attack, with numerous targets wiped off the face of the earth by Ukraine's lethal drone pilots. Over the course of a single night on April 15th, the Unmanned Systems Forces eliminated 3 separate air defense missile systems, 2 Iskander bases, a Rubicon base, 2 oil depots, an ammunition depot in Crimea, and several military facilities in Donetsk, for a grand total of 16 targets. Again, Magyar was proud to share the news online, describing how pilots from the 9th Kairos Battalion of the 414th Magyar's Birds Separate Brigade pulled off the almost miraculous attack. It's reaching a point where barely a single week passes without headlines and news reports emerging of yet another strike like this. Time and time again, Ukraine's drones are wiping out high-value Russian targets, often focusing on either air defense systems or the infrastructure those systems are supposed to protect. Before we look closer at the long-term impacts of these attacks, if this is the kind of insight you want more of, make sure you are subscribed to the Military Show. We break it down like this every single week. The more frequent these attacks become, the worse it gets for Russia. Already, some of the country's most hardline nationalist military bloggers are airing their frustrations and even turning on the Kremlin, wondering how and why attacks like these are being allowed to happen. And it's not difficult to understand their anger. Russia is supposed to be one of the greatest military powers on the planet. It's supposed to be fighting a far smaller and weaker opponent. It was supposed to have won this war years ago. Yet here we are over 4 years into the fighting, and rather than being on the brink of victory, Russia has never looked weaker, while Ukraine has grown from strength to strength. And attacks like this truly serve to highlight the dramatic differences in the two sides' strategies, tactics, and overall abilities to adapt to the challenges they face and the changing conditions of the war on the whole. On the one side, there's Russia, which has from day one essentially operated on the unshakable belief that brute force is all that's needed to win this war. While its tactics might have slightly shifted over time, transitioning from an initial focus on armor and mechanized assaults to become more oriented around drones and glide bombs over time, the overall strategy has always seemed to boil down to one simple principle: if Russia throws enough men and munitions at Ukraine, it will eventually win. The country's defenses won't be able to hold out forever and will eventually fall, and even if that costs 1 million lives and billions of dollars in equipment, the Kremlin's victory should be inevitable. The problem is that even if a Russian victory might have looked inevitable in the early stages of the war, it hasn't felt that way for several years now. The country's territorial gains have diminished, its casualties have skyrocketed, and its progress towards achieving its objectives has stalled, stagnated, and even regressed in some areas. This doesn't mean that Russia is about to lose the war, nor does it mean that Russia isn't still dealing damage to Ukraine. The Kremlin's war machine continues to carry out near-daily long-range strikes on Ukrainian towns and cities, relying heavily on missiles and drones to do so. It continues to kill civilians and smash infrastructure at scale, yet Ukraine continues to resist. Because even though Russia's approach causes a lot of bloodshed and brutality, it's also an approach that lacks any sort of clear direction or intention. The Kremlin simply seems to think that all it has to do is keep pushing, keep sending the swarms and the missiles and the glide bombs, and eventually Ukraine will buckle and break. It's keeping up the pressure, but generally just doing the same thing again and again, while somehow expecting different results. Meanwhile, on the other side of this conflict, we have Ukraine, which has taken a drastically different approach to the war, focusing on innovation, adaptation, and making the most of every single resource at its disposal. It's tricky to see the logic in Russia's drone and missile strikes, but it's much easier to see it in Ukraine's, and the strike on the FSB base, combined with other recent attacks on drone training centers, air defenses, and other military facilities, demonstrates the country's plan quite conclusively. It's a two-phase plan. Phase 1 revolves around systematically destroying as many Russian air defenses as possible. S-300s, S-400s, Pantsirs, Buks, Tors, all of these systems and others are being hunted down and eliminated by Ukrainian drone crews, falling like dominoes with every passing week. Some costing tens of millions of dollars, others hundreds of millions. Some even get close to the billion-dollar mark. Every time one of these systems is taken out, Russia suffers a serious financial loss, and it doesn't have an endless supply of these systems to simply replace those that are destroyed. It takes time, money, and materials to make more of them, and in the meantime, Russia is left with additional gaps in its defenses. That's where Phase 2 comes in. Once the defenses are down, Ukraine has the freedom to deploy its heavier weapons like bigger drones that may move a little more slowly but have significantly larger payloads against Russian infrastructure. And that's why we continue to see the likes of refineries, logistics nodes, command posts, headquarters, and other high-value targets set ablaze by Ukrainian munitions week in, week out. It's not by chance or luck, it's by design. Ukraine is constantly gathering data about its enemy, finding out where its defenses are placed and figuring out the best ways to eradicate them. And it's gotten so much better at all of these things as the war has continued. Indeed, if we roll back the clocks just a couple of years, this sort of thing simply wasn't happening with any regularity. Ukraine did launch deep strikes against Russian targets from time to time, but its attacks were generally quite sporadic, sometimes spaced out by several weeks or months. And they didn't always deal that much damage, as the country didn't yet have the sophisticated weapons or additional experience it has today. Now things are completely different. More resilient and better equipped to cope with the conditions of the conflict, Ukraine is wreaking havoc on its enemy and barely giving them time to catch their breath in between each attack. Similarly, there was once a time in this war when the only Russians that were really at risk of being killed by Ukrainian drones were those either at the front lines or quite close to them, because drones could only go so far before being inevitably shot down. Now, yet again, it's a different story. Increasingly, we're seeing reports of Ukrainian drones flying tens or even hundreds of miles into enemy territory, deep into the occupied regions, or even over the border and into Russia, seeking and destroying the Kremlin troops with ease. No one is safe, nowhere is safe. And it's all thanks to Ukraine's master plan, which revolves, quite simply, around making this war as difficult as possible for Russia to fight. It's about nullifying the enemy's defenses, destroying their most valuable assets, and severing the supply lines that continue to feed the front lines and fuel the Kremlin's war machine. And it's working incredibly well. Because as Russia gets weaker, Ukraine gets stronger. The more defenses it eliminates, the more pathways open up for additional attacks. The more infrastructure it destroys, the more time and money Russia has to spend carrying out repairs. And the more supply lines it cuts, the harder it becomes for the Kremlin's frontline forces to survive and plan their next moves. It's reaching a point where Ukraine could, theoretically, carry out deep strikes against Russian high-value targets on an almost daily basis. In fact, between May 1st and 21st, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces stated that they had eliminated 20 air defense systems in total. That's basically one per day. This is simply not sustainable from the Russian perspective. How can the country expect to win a war when it can't even defend its own infrastructure, many miles from the front? How can it continue to expect some sort of inevitable victory when its defenses are dropping like flies? The simple answer: it can't. Russia is losing. It's suffering strike after strike, and its military leaders are failing to find any solutions to the problems they face. They're being forced to effectively ration their remaining air defenses, repositioning systems to the most high-profile locations while leaving others completely exposed. The evidence of this is arguably most visible in Crimea, where Russian military bloggers have been complaining that the Kremlin seems to have abandoned any notion of trying to adequately defend the territory it illegally seized in 2014. One blogger called Maxim Kalashnikov, for example, says, "The land route to Crimea increasingly resembles the roads in Afghanistan in the 1980s. The remains of destroyed vehicles are scattered along the sides of the road. The enemy is disrupting the supply with drones." Another blogger added that there appears to be a systematic effort to cut off the land logistics corridor to Crimea, while one named Romanov notes, "It's an obvious fact that the number and frequency of such attacks will soon increase. However, this is not obvious to the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Russia. Along the route there are no small sky monitoring posts, so nobody will counter the drone teams." He adds that there's nobody in the area to keep civilians safe, no mobile observation groups, no protective nets in place to guard against future drone attacks. Again, this is not normal. In the past, in areas that are important for logistical reasons or close to the front lines, Russia was at least able to mount a decent amount of defenses. It had nets and other anti-drone measures in place, for example, as well as electronic warfare jammers, mobile drone teams, and so on. Now there's none of that. And it's not because Russia doesn't care or doesn't want to defend the territories it's taken. It's simply because Ukraine is doing such a stellar job of striking the right places at the right times, making it almost impossible for its enemy to organize any sort of serious defense. With an increasingly finite amount of assets and resources to work with, and an increasing number of strikes raining down on its infrastructure and defenses, Russia's prospects have never looked this grim. You can learn more about the country's catastrophic collapse in this video, or for another example of Ukraine outwitting and outthinking its opponent, check out this video, which looks at how Kyiv's elite hackers managed to lure unsuspecting Russians into inescapable death traps. Don't forget to subscribe to The Military Show for more insights, analysis, and breaking military news from around the world. And thank you, as always, for watching.